The morning was cold and quiet, the kind of cold that sinks into the bones and makes even small movements feel heavy. A pale fog hung low over the empty highway, stretching across the open fields like a thin white blanket. The road ran straight for miles, with no houses nearby and only a few dead trees standing far apart, their branches bare and lifeless. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, a place most people passed through without giving a second thought. A small road construction crew had arrived early that morning to prepare the area for resurfacing work. Their machines hummed softly, breaking the silence as the sun slowly rose. One of the workers, a middle-aged man named Carl, stepped away from the others to check the edge of the ditch that ran alongside the road. The ditch was shallow and usually filled with weeds, old bottles, and trash thrown from passing cars. At first, Carl noticed something dark near the muddy water. He assumed it was a discarded jacket or a bundle of cloth caught in the grass. He moved closer, annoyed that someone had once again dumped garbage along the highway. As he stepped down into the ditch, the smell hit him. It was faint but unmistakable. He froze. When Carl looked again, his heart dropped. The shape was wrong. Too still. Too human. He stumbled backward, nearly slipping in the mud, and shouted for the others. Within minutes, the worksite was in chaos. Someone called the police. Another worker stood silently, staring at the ditch with his hand shaking. The police arrived quickly, their lights flashing against the fog. Officers carefully approached the ditch and confirmed what everyone feared. It was a body. A man, lying on his side, partially covered by weeds and dirt. He looked as if he had been placed there deliberately, not thrown or dragged. Whoever left him had taken time. The area was sealed off, and the construction crew was sent away. Word spread fast through the small town nearby. Murders were rare there, and this one felt especially disturbing. The location was too isolated to be an accident, yet too close to the highway to be random. The man appeared to be in his early 30s. His clothes were simple and worn, but clean. A plain shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed shoes. There were no labels on the clothes, no laundry marks, nothing that could hint at where they came from. His pockets were empty. No wallet, no phone, no keys, no papers, nothing. His face showed signs of violence. There were bruises along his jaw and neck, and a deep cut near his temple. The medical examiner later said the injuries suggested a struggle, yet there were no defensive wounds on his hands. It was as if he had known what was coming or had no chance to fight back. The strangest detail came when officers tried to take fingerprints. The skin on the tips of his fingers was damaged, rough and scarred in an unnatural way. It wasn't the result of work or injury. It looked deliberate, as if someone had tried to erase his identity at the most basic level. Photos were taken, measurements recorded, and the body was transported to the morgue. Detectives stood quietly at the scene long after everyone else had left. The fog had lifted, but the air still felt heavy. One officer finally broke the silence by asking the question no one could answer. Who was he? Back at the station, the investigation began immediately. The man had no tattoos visible, no jewelry, and no personal items. Dental records were checked, but there was no match. His face was photographed and shared with nearby towns and counties. Flyers were sent out. Local news stations aired brief reports, hoping someone might recognize him. Days passed. Then weeks. The phone stayed silent. No missing person reports matched the man's description. No families came forward. No co-workers called. It was as if the man had appeared out of nowhere and died without ever belonging to anyone. Detectives gave him a temporary name for paperwork purposes, but among themselves, they began calling him the Highwayman. It was easier than saying the unidentified male over and over again. Still, the name felt wrong. Too simple for a mystery this deep. The autopsy brought more questions than answers. The cause of death was ruled a combination of blunt force trauma and suffocation. The injuries suggested he had been held down. The time of death was estimated to be late at night, just hours before the construction crew arrived. He had been alive somewhere not long before he was found. There were signs he had traveled recently. Dirt on his shoes did not match the soil near the highway. Small fibers on his clothes came from an unknown source. The details suggested movement, a journey that ended in that lonely ditch. Investigators searched nearby motels, gas stations, and rest stops. No one remembered seeing him. No security cameras captured his image. In 1993, cameras were rare, and most recordings were erased quickly. Whatever trail he had left behind was already gone. As weeks turned into months, pressure grew to close the case. There were no suspects, no leads, and no identity. Eventually, the man was buried in a small cemetery outside town. The grave had a simple marker with a case number and the year. No name. No message. Just silence. Some of the officers attended the burial. It felt wrong not to. One detective later said it was the quietest funeral he had ever seen. No family. No friends. Only strangers standing around a hole in the ground. The file was marked inactive and placed in storage. New cases came in. Life moved on. But for those who had seen the body in the ditch that morning, the image never fully faded. Some nights, Detective Alan Brooks would replay the scene in his mind. The fog. The empty road. The man with no name. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a murder. It was an erasure. Someone had wanted this man to disappear completely. And for a long time, they succeeded. When the case file was first labeled inactive, Detective Alan Brooks felt something tighten in his chest. He had worked murders before, but this one refused to settle in his mind. Most cases left behind faces, voices, and stories. This man left nothing. No name. No past. Just a body beside a road in a silence that grew heavier with time. Brooks had been a detective for over 15 years in 1993. He knew how crimes usually unfolded. People argued, emotions rose, mistakes were made. Even the most careful killers left something behind. But this case felt different. The absence of evidence felt intentional. Someone had not only taken a life, but carefully removed everything that could explain it. In the weeks after the burial, Brooks continued working the case quietly, even when his supervisor suggested it was time to move on. He spread the photos across his desk late at night and studied the man's face. The eyes were closed in the photographs, but Brooks imagined them open, searching for something familiar. He wondered what the man had been thinking in his final moments. Fear, regret, or perhaps acceptance. One detail bothered Brooks more than anything else. The clothes. They were ordinary, but too clean for a man found in a muddy ditch. They showed wear, but no stains, no rips, almost as if they had been chosen carefully. Brooks contacted clothing manufacturers, hoping to trace the items through distribution records. Most led nowhere. The labels had been removed with precision, not torn, not faded by time. The shoes told a similar story. They were cheap, but heavily worn, especially around the heels. This was a man who walked a lot. Maybe someone without a car. Maybe someone moving from place to place. Brooks imagined bus stations, shelters, small jobs paid in cash. A life lived quietly, without connections. The scars on the man's hands suggested years of manual labor. Calluses formed not by machines, but by repetitive, physical work. Construction, farming, factory lines. Brooks visited local employers and asked if anyone recognized the description. No one did. It was as if the man had passed through the world without leaving a shadow. In 1995, Brooks took the case to a regional task force meeting. He laid out the details, hoping fresh eyes might see something he missed. The room was silent when he finished. Other detectives admitted they had nothing. One even joked that maybe the man had dropped out of the sky. Brooks didn't laugh. As technology improved, Brooks kept trying. In the late 1990s, fingerprint databases expanded. He submitted the damaged prints again, hoping new software could recover something useful. The results came back the same. No match. The system returned nothing but an error message and a cold reminder that the man still had no name. The lack of missing person reports was the hardest part to accept. People went missing all the time, but usually someone noticed. A mother, a coworker, a neighbor. Someone always asked questions. With this man, there were none. It was as if his absence had gone completely unnoticed. Brooks began to wonder if that was the point. In 2001, a routine forensic review brought a small but strange discovery. Under the man's hairline, hidden near the base of the skull, was a faint marking. It was not a full tattoo, more like a symbol burned into the skin long ago. It was so faded that it had been missed in the original examination. The symbol was photographed and analyzed. It did not match any known gang markings, military symbols, or prison tattoos. Experts were brought in. Historians, criminologists, even a tattoo artist. No one could identify it. The symbol remained a mystery, another piece of a puzzle that refused to form a picture. By then, the town had mostly forgotten the case. New businesses opened. Old ones closed. People who had been children in 1993 were now adults. The story of the highwayman became little more than a rumor, something mentioned late at night or during slow conversations. Brooks retired in 2005. On his last day, he took the case file home. It wasn't allowed, but no one stopped him. He told himself he would review it in his spare time. And he did. For years. Sometimes, he would drive to the cemetery and stand near the unmarked grave. He never stayed long. It felt wrong, like watching someone sleep without permission. But he wanted the man to know, in whatever way possible, that he hadn't been forgotten by everyone. As time passed, Brooks' thoughts grew darker. He started to believe the man's life had been erased long before his death. No records. No identity. No trail. This wasn't just a victim of violence. This was someone who had been removed from the system itself. The idea disturbed him deeply. In quiet moments, Brooks imagined the man's final days. Had he been running from something? Had he trusted the wrong person? Or had he been trying to reclaim a life that was taken from him long ago? The case haunted Brooks not because of what he knew, but because of what he didn't. The silence around the man's life was louder than any evidence. It suggested planning, power, and patience. Someone had wanted him gone, not just dead, but erased. Years later, Brooks would say that some crimes do not end when the body is found. Some crimes continue in the unanswered questions, in the empty spaces where truth should be. For this man, those empty spaces were everything he had left. By the time the world began to change, by the time technology and curiosity reopened old wounds, the highwayman had already waited decades. Waiting for someone to remember him. Waiting for someone to ask the question again. Who was he? By the time Rachel Moore discovered the highwayman case, nearly 30 years had passed since the body was found. Rachel was 28, young enough to be fearless and old enough to be tired of surface-level stories. She worked as a freelance journalist, chasing forgotten cases that had slipped through the cracks of time. Her focus was not on famous killers or dramatic trials, but on the stories no one finished telling. She found the case by accident late one night, while searching through a digital archive of unsolved crimes. The headline was brief and unemotional, only a few lines long, but it stopped her cold. Unidentified male found beside highway. No identity established. Case inactive. The date read 1993. Rachel clicked deeper. There were no dramatic photos, no interviews, no follow-ups. Just a faceless record of a man who had died and been forgotten. What unsettled her most was not the murder itself, but the time that followed. 30 years, and still no name. She drove to the town a week later. It was smaller than she expected, quiet in a way that felt permanent. The highway where the body had been found looked ordinary, almost peaceful. Cars passed without slowing, unaware of what had happened the decades earlier. Rachel stood near the ditch and imagined the fog, the silence, the moment someone realized the truth. The place felt empty, but not calm. At the local police station, she asked about the case. The officer at the front desk frowned slightly, as if trying to remember something unpleasant. After a short wait, she was escorted to a small office where an older lieutenant listened politely as she explained her interest. "We don't get many questions about that one anymore," he said. "Most of the files were archived years ago." Rachel asked if anything remained. The lieutenant hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There's some old material in storage. Can't promise it's useful." The basement smelled of dust and old paper. The lights flickered as the lieutenant led her down a narrow staircase. Rows of shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes labeled in fading ink. Most were untouched, their contents sealed away by time and neglect. After nearly an hour of searching, The lieutenant stopped in front of a small cardboard box pushed far back on a shelf. The label was barely readable. Case number. Yeah. No name. This is it, he said. Rachel's pulse quickened as she lifted the box. It was lighter than she expected. Inside were photographs, handwritten notes, and copies of reports yellowed with age. She sat on the cold basement floor and began to look through them carefully. The photographs showed the scene, the ditch, the empty road. Then the body. Rachel studied the man's face longer than she meant to. There was something familiar about it, not in recognition, but in expression. He looked ordinary, too ordinary to vanish completely. As she turned the pages, one item caught her attention. A small plastic evidence bag taped to the inside of the box. Inside it was a broken wristwatch. The watch was cheap, scratched, and stopped at a time that meant nothing. But when Rachel turned it over, she noticed something engraved on the back. 3 letters and a date. The date was just 2 days before the man's death. Rachel photographed the engraving and asked the lieutenant about it. He shrugged. Never let anyway. Probably a gift. Or something he owned for years. But Rachel felt differently. The engraving felt intentional. Recent. Like a marker, not a memory. She returned home and began researching the letters. At first, nothing made sense. They didn't match initials of known suspects or companies. She searched business records, school e-books, old newspapers. Slowly, she realized the letters appeared in sealed court documents from the early 1990s, often redacted or partially hidden. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. Rachel decided to share the story online. Not the full theory, just the facts. An unidentified man. 30 years. A watch with an engraving. She posted photos and asked if anyone recognized the details. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of comments flooded in. Amateur detectives offered theories. Some believed he was a runaway. Others suggested organized crime. A few claimed government involvement. Most comments went nowhere, but Rachel read every one. 2 days later, she received a message that made her stomach tighten. The account had no profile photo. No history. Just a single sentence. He wasn't supposed to be found. Rachel stared at the screen for a long time before responding. She asked who they were. The reply came hours later. Someone who remembers. The conversation that followed was careful and vague. The sender refused to give a name or location. They warned Rachel to stop digging. They said the man's lack of identity was not a failure, but a design. Rachel asked if the man had a name. Yes, the sender replied, but it was taken from him. That night, Rachel barely slept. She replayed the words in her mind, wondering if it was a prank. But the details the sender mentioned matched facts that had never been public. Small things. A scar. The position of the body. The time estimate of death. Someone out there knew more. Rachel contacted former Detective Alan Brooks after finding his name in the old reports. Brooks was hesitant at first, but agreed to meet. They sat in a quiet diner while Rachel laid out everything she had found. Brooks listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back slowly and exhaled. I always thought someone wanted him erased, Brooks said. I just never had proof. Rachel told him about the message. Brooks' face darkened. Be careful, he said. Some secrets stay buried because someone powerful wants them that way. Despite the warning, Rachel kept going. She followed the trail of sealed documents, finding patterns that suggested witness protection relocations in the early 1990s. Names changed. Records erased. Lives rebuilt under strict rules. And sometimes, rules were broken. Late one evening, Rachel returned to her apartment to find the door slightly open. Her heart raced as she stepped inside. The place had been searched. Drawers open. Paper scattered. Her laptop was untouched, but her notebook was gone. There was no sign of forced entry. Rachel reported the break-in, but nothing came of it. No fingerprints. No suspects. The message was clear. Someone was watching. Still, she refused to stop. She backed up her files and began preparing a full documentary. The story was no longer just about a body with no name. It was about a system that could erase a person completely, then pretend they never existed. As Rachel edited late into the night, she returned again and again to the image of the watch. The date engraved on the back felt like a countdown, a reminder that time had been running out long before the man reached that highway. 30 years earlier, a life had ended in silence. Now, that silence was breaking, and someone was afraid of what would be heard next. Rachel knew that once the break-in happened, there was no turning back. Someone had crossed an invisible line, and it confirmed what she already feared. The Highwayman case was not just forgotten history. It was unfinished business, and someone wanted it to stay that way. The anonymous messages continued, but they became more careful. Short sentences. No extra details. Always late at night. The sender never threatened her directly, but the tone carried weight. They spoke as if they had lived with the secret for a long time and were tired of carrying it. One message finally changed everything. His name was Daniel Cross. Rachel read the sentence over and over again. A name. After 30 years, a name had surfaced. It felt unreal, like touching something that was never meant to be found. She replied immediately, asking how they knew. The answer came hours later. He testified. Then he disappeared. Rachel felt a chill move through her body. Testified. Against whom was the question she didn't even need to ask yet. She already suspected the answer would be dangerous. She began searching for the name Daniel Cross. At first, nothing appeared. No birth records. No death certificate. No social security history. It was as if the name itself had been scrubbed clean. But Rachel had learned by now that erased records often left shadows behind. She widened her search to court archives from the early 1990s. Buried deep in sealed documents, she found fragments, redacted names, closed hearings. One file mentioned a key witness in a major criminal case who vanished before the final stage of the trial. The witness was referred to only as DC. The date matched the engraving on the watch. Rachel contacted a legal researcher she trusted, someone experienced in sealed federal cases. After days of digging, the researcher confirmed something unsettling. In the early 1990s, a powerful criminal network had been under investigation. The case relied heavily on one witness. Without that witness, the case collapsed. The witness was never seen again. Rachel met Detective Brooks again and shared what she had uncovered. Brooks sat quietly, his face pale. That explains the silence, he said. No missing persons. No records. If he was protected, his old life would have been erased. But protection failed him, Rachel said. Brooks nodded slowly. Oh, he stepped outside it. The anonymous sender contacted Rachel again, this time with more detail. They claimed Daniel Cross had entered a secret relocation program after agreeing to testify. He was given a new identity, a new place to live, and strict rules. No contact with family. No connections to the past. Complete disappearance. For a while, it worked. But Daniel struggled. The sender said he was lonely, paranoid, and afraid. He felt trapped in a life that wasn't his. According to the messages, Daniel tried to reach out to someone from his past. Just one person. That decision triggered everything. Rachel pressed for proof. The sender hesitated, then sent a scanned document. It was incomplete, but enough. A memo referencing a relocated asset who had violated terms. The date was 2 weeks before the body was found. Rachel's hands trembled as she read it. If the document was real, it meant Daniel Cross was not just murdered. He was hunted. The more Rachel uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. She noticed cars slowing near her apartment. Phone calls that went silent when she answered. Emails that failed to send. Small things that could be explained away, but together formed a pattern. One evening, as she returned home, she found a note slipped under her door. It was handwritten, something that felt almost personal. Some truths destroy more than lies. Rachel understood the warning. Publishing the full story could expose people who had survived because Daniel had stayed silent for years. It could reopen cases that powerful figures wanted buried forever. But it could also give Daniel back the one thing he had lost completely: his identity. Rachel struggled with the decision. She spoke to journalists, lawyers, and even victims' families from the original criminal case. Some begged her to continue. Others warned her to stop. The weight of the story pressed down on her, heavy and constant. The anonymous sender sent one final message. He wanted to be remembered. That's all. That sentence settled something inside Rachel. She realized the story was no longer about danger or secrets. It was about a man who had sacrificed his life twice. Once when he testified, and again when he died alone on the side of a road. Rachel decided to go public. She released a preview of the documentary online, carefully presenting the evidence without revealing sources. She spoke about the unidentified man, the erased records, and the name Daniel Cross. She did not accuse anyone directly, but she asked the questions clearly and calmly. The reaction was explosive. Viewers shared the video across social media. Former law enforcement officers came forward, some anonymously, confirming pieces of the story. A retired federal clerk admitted that certain files had been intentionally destroyed in the late 1990s. A former prosecutor acknowledged that a key witness had vanished before trial, though they refused to comment further. Then came the most shocking development. A woman contacted Rachel claiming to be Daniel Cross's sister. She said her brother had disappeared in the early 1990s. The family was told he had left the country. They were warned not to ask questions. Over time, they were pressured to move on. When Rachel showed her the photographs, the woman broke down. She recognized the man immediately. The jawline, the scar near the eyebrow, the expression she had known her whole life. For 30 years, the family had lived with uncertainty. Now, they finally had an answer. Rachel arranged a recorded interview, but before it could happen, she received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and cold. "You are reopening matters that were closed for a reason," the voice said. "Some protections exist for the greater good." Rachel replied without hesitation. "So does the truth." The line went dead. Rachel knew then that consequences would follow. Charges might never be filed. Names might never be spoken in court. But the story had already escaped. It could not be put back. As she finalized the documentary, Rachel reflected on how close Daniel Cross had come to disappearing completely. A body with no name. A grave with no marker. A life reduced to a case number. Instead, his name was now being spoken again. And somewhere, the people who believed they had erased him forever were realizing that even the deepest silence can be broken. Sometimes, the past does not stay buried. Sometimes, it waits. When Rachel released the full documentary, she expected attention. What she did not expect was the silence that came first. For several hours after it went live, nothing happened. No comments. No messages. No reaction at all. It was as if the internet itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, the numbers began to climb. Views turned into thousands. Thousands turned into millions. Comments poured in from around the world. People were shocked, angry, heartbroken. Many said they had never heard of a case like this before. A man erased so completely that even his death had been hidden behind paperwork and time. The name Daniel Cross spread everywhere. News outlets picked up the story within days. Some focused on the mystery. Others focused on the failure of systems meant to protect people. A few avoided the deeper questions entirely. But the truth had already reached too many people to be ignored. Rachel watched interviews and reactions from her small apartment, barely sleeping. Her phone rang constantly. Journalists wanted statements. Lawyers wanted to talk privately. Former officials wanted to correct misunderstandings. Rachel listened to all of it, but trusted very little. What mattered most to her was Daniel's family. She traveled to meet them in person. They lived quietly, far from the town where Daniel had died. His sister showed Rachel old photographs. Daniel as a teenager, smiling awkwardly at the camera. Daniel at a family gathering, laughing, alive in a way that felt painfully distant now. For 30 years, they had lived with questions. For 30 years, they had been told not to ask. Now, they finally knew what had happened, and the relief was mixed with grief so deep it felt physical. Daniel's sister asked one question that Rachel could not answer. Did he know we were looking for him? Rachel was honest. "I don't know," she said softly. That night, Rachel lay awake thinking about Daniel's final days. She imagined him alone, carrying a name he could not use, memories he could not share. She imagined the moment he decided to reach out, knowing it might cost him everything. That choice, more than anything, revealed who Daniel truly was. He did not want to disappear forever. As pressure grew, officials released brief statements. They claimed there was no proof of wrongdoing. They said records were lost due to time and policy changes. They expressed sympathy while accepting no responsibility. It was the kind of response designed to sound complete while answering nothing. No arrests were made. The people who had ordered Daniel's relocation, who had failed to protect him, who may have allowed his death to remain hidden, were either retired, deceased, or shielded by laws that no longer allowed prosecution. Justice, in the traditional sense, was no longer possible. But something else happened instead. The cemetery where Daniel had been buried without a name agreed to replace the marker. A small ceremony was planned. Nothing official. No speeches from authorities. Just family, a few journalists, and people who had followed the story from afar. Rachel attended quietly, standing near the back. Daniel Cross's name was carved into stone for the first time. Beneath it were the dates of his birth and death. No case number. No reference to how long he had been unknown. Just a name, finally returned to him. As the ceremony ended, an older man approached Rachel. He introduced himself as a retired federal agent. His hand shook slightly as he spoke. "I couldn't save him," the man said. "But I tried." Rachel listened as the man explained that the system Daniel had entered was never meant to last forever. Witness protection was built on rules, and those rules often ignored human cost. Daniel had been useful, then inconvenient. When he broke protocol, the protection around him weakened. Not everyone involved had wanted him dead, the agent said. But enough people were willing to look away. "I've lived with that," the man said. "All these years." Rachel did not judge him. The story had taught her that responsibility was rarely simple. It was laid, spread across time and decisions made by many hands. In the weeks that followed, new information continued to surface. Not enough to reopen the case legally, but enough to confirm what Rachel had revealed. Daniel's testimony had helped dismantle parts of a criminal network, even if the biggest players escaped punishment. His sacrifice had mattered, even if he never lived to see the results. The anonymous sender sent one final message after the documentary aired. "You did what he couldn't." Rachel replied with a simple thank you. The account never responded again. Eventually, the attention faded. Another story took the spotlight. The world moved on, as it always did. But something permanent had changed. Daniel Cross was no longer a body without an identity. His story became a reminder that systems designed to protect can also destroy, that secrets kept too long become crimes of their own, and that even when justice fails, truth can still survive. Rachel continued her work, but no story ever affected her the same way again. Sometimes, late at night, she would return to the footage of the empty highway, the ditch where it all ended. She no longer saw just a crime scene. She saw a man who refused to vanish quietly. For 30 years, Daniel Cross had been known only as the Highwayman, a mystery buried beneath time and silence. In the end, it was not law enforcement or courts that gave him his identity back. It was memory. It was someone choosing to care. And in the world of true crime, where so many stories end without answers, Daniel's story stood as proof that even after decades of silence, the truth can still find its way to the surface. Some bodies are forgotten. Some names are erased. But not forever.